As far as I know, Henry, where's Debbie? Is she here somewhere? Yeah, he's working, isn't he? He's away working. Yeah, yeah. He told me about it, and of course I forgot about it. So, but Larry got him announced anyway, even if we weren't sure why. But it wasn't Henry's fault. Also, in the case of Sherry, some of you may know some of the details. She was okay as far as Lear could tell up until yesterday, and then she wasn't able to wake up this morning. And it wasn't because she'd passed away. She just couldn't wake up. And then eventually she died this afternoon. Lear, she's kind of one of these constant sort of players, and she's lived a lot, and she seems to be doing pretty well. When you guys say, those of you who've been around the house and things like that, she seems to be doing okay. Sometimes it's hard to know when she's not doing okay, but nevertheless, it's certainly not a big shock, but it just came on pretty sudden in that sense, so there was some shockness to it. So, and that's Sherry, her daughter. We're going to continue our discussion of Joshua. The book of Joshua itself, I don't know that you would, after your studies and just kind of following along and reading, it almost seems like the title of Joshua maybe doesn't really fit all that well. It's not a biography of Joshua by any stretch. And really, if you were going to name it something else, we're perfectly okay. We have mentioned many, many times over the years that these titles were added later. And so I think that was a pretty good one. Why would it be good to name it after him? And then somebody maybe come up with some other name it might be worth using to title it. Yeah, go ahead, Maya. What are you going to give me now? With the Joshua side or the?
Oh, I'm for the Joshua.
Okay, go for it. All right, go. Yeah.
Because and especially after the verses you sent out,
Yeah.
there was because God's always has this plan, we can't see what He's doing other than what He reveals in His
Yeah,
Word.
right.
We
Yeah.
can study it and maybe draw speculations, but God has always had a plan, and Joshua was going to be a key person.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that he is certainly, when it comes to the time when Moses was gone, Joshua does take on a very, very significant role. Even though we don't get a whole lot of stories about him, there are a few, but not too many. What about naming it something else? Yeah, go ahead, Jessica. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because we're getting a historical look at them, the people of Israel, coming out of Egypt, becoming a nation, if you will, and then going to their land that God had promised for them. So I think calling it the story of Israel or something like that. It wouldn't be the complete, but at least during this period of time. Any thoughts on this? I think the idea of where? Okay, come on. Get it up there. Get it up there.
I think after reading all these, I think it's God's warrior.
It's what now?
God's warrior.
God's warrior. Okay. Yeah, well, he's definitely that, isn't he? Yeah, he seems to be there generally. We call him the general. I don't know how anyone actually knew for sure he was a general, but most books talk about his being a general. Well, and he was a great leader and a great warrior, because there's a lot of fighting there. One of the things I'd like you to, and this is probably directed more at those who teach the little kids class, talked about how there is a lot of stuff in there that's kind of gory, and I brought this out at the beginning, but I'd like to hear from some who have taught it, and then how do you teach it to the kids? And I know some of you are thinking, because you've shared that with me before, but I'd like for us to hear that again, because there is a lot of fighting, there is a lot of dying, and I mean, there are certain things that, we can just not really put emphasis on because, maybe a person might not be able to handle it at a certain age. And so we do it that way with a lot of things. So we shouldn't not approach it that way. If we think this is too difficult for children, but I'd like to understand why you think it is, if you have that perception. Generally, that's where people kind of come down. Why? Why is all of that there? Well, if you look at what was happening, these were people who were coming out of slavery and they were going to their land, and there were people who were living there. It wasn't, I read in a book today that it wasn't like nations are like nation states are today. Most people were there where they were because they were able to conquer certain areas, and so that was their territory. It was more tribal than it was anything. And so here they come, and they're going to fight for their land. And of course, as I've mentioned already, we certainly get a picture in that area of similar things going on, although the politics is quite different. But I think, the reality is that that's what used to happen. People would come and take over land. And I'm not sure that, if you want to argue that from some sort of a moral standpoint, I mean, we at least had, Adam and Eve, and they lived in a place, they lived in a garden, and they eventually spread out, those families spread out, and so people would go to land and they would take that land. And that, I can't imagine how the world would have been populated if it was done in any other way. I mean, it's just the way things are. So, but I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that. So I didn't want to spring it on you today, but I'd like for you to think it through. But as I say, particularly those of you who've had to struggle with maybe teaching your children or teaching in a children's class. Okay, is that kind of clear? Okay. I picked some things out here of, the story here where it kind of puts Joshua in the story. And that's going back to, he's not driving the plan like Micah says, but he's very much a part of it. And in Exodus chapter 17, verse 9 through 14, let's turn over and have a look at that. And the point I was trying to also get you to understand is that there's just not a lot of information about Joshua. I mean, if you're trying to figure out what his life story is, we get little pieces of it. But in Exodus 17, 9 through 14, Robert, would you read that for us? That Robert over there on the south side? 17, you should start in verse 19. Yes, no, chapter 17, verse 9 through 14. Okay. This has always been, I don't want to say, full of humor, but I'm trying to see this, happening and what's happening. And then did people understand what was going on until the hands are up? And then they started getting the picture. I don't know. But obviously, if you were looking at this, you would describe it as a what? A miracle or a non-miracle? It's a miracle. Okay, it's a miracle. And God is very much involved in it. Now, think about what you read about there at the beginning of the chapter, and where Joshua is mentioned here is in verse 8. It says, "Then Amalek came and fought against Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, 'Choose men and go out and fight against Amalek.'" And then he talks about how that's going to happen. usually when we see Amalek, people go, well, I don't know, that doesn't seem all that familiar to me. But then you say Amalekites, and all of a sudden we have a different reaction to it. Oh, yeah, I know who the Amalekites are, right? But the people of Amalek, it just sounds, different to me. And of course, we know of them mostly because of what? Go ahead, raise your hand, somebody else. Hang on, Micah. Saul, right, yeah, because of Saul. And how he didn't do his job with the Amalekites. He was told to go destroy them, and he didn't do it. Okay, that's almost like 300 years later from this particular account. So we understand that they had become enemies. And does anyone understand how they actually became enemies? Well, if you follow along, right when they came out of captivity, the Amalekites, or the people of Amalek, attacked them. And that's when Joshua, the warrior, was called to go fight these guys. Now, the thing that I think is also significant is that he is a descendant of a very carnal man. If you were trying to think of the most carnal man in the Old Testament, who would that be? No, close though. You better slow down, Micah, because you're going the wrong way. It's a good try though. What? No? Esau. Thank you, Laura Lee. He was a descendant of Esau. And of course, why do we call him carnal? Carnal. He sold his birthright, and he was a very materialistic sort of fellow in the way that was there then. But going back to Micah, I mean, there's plenty of people who are carnal. Anytime you're talking about anybody related to the 12 tribes of Israel, generally speaking, somebody in there is pretty carnal. These guys weren't class citizens all the time. Yeah, Micah.
I thought you said a descendant of Joshua. I'm sorry.
That's okay. All right. Well, don't worry. That's just it happens. Sometimes you understand, and sometimes you're understood. So I understand how that feels too. I know. But anyway, but that would have been, it was too much thinking for me about Joshua. I'm not really that sure about how much I know about the name Joshua's descendants. I know some of them, but this guy, it was very significant because this happened. When did the whole thing between Esau and Jacob happen? Is it Jacob or is it Isaac? No, Jacob. Right. Okay. How long had this happened? How long ago did this happen? Yeah, it was. I mean, it was just when what happened. I mean, it was they had become a nation. Abraham had already been the one who received his promise. The nation forms. We get the 12 sons and the 12 tribes. Then they get taken off into captivity. So it's a long time ago. So there was, I guess, if you would be inclined to think of people who have grudges toward people, I think maybe this would be a pretty good example of it. But you see this miraculous battle of Amalek, and my question is, why do you think this type of battle happened at this point in time? What might have been a good reason for this to happen? Well, what's recorded before of it? What happens in chapter 17, the first few verses? Merrick. Yeah, and it was not a real good time because they wanted water and they thought God was not taking care of them, and God got very angry with them, and that was the time that Moses got in trouble when he was told to strike the rock, and he said yes. He did that, but he also opened his mouth and made it sound like he was taking credit for this, and rather than giving the glory to God. Do you have a point, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see how tired Moses got holding his arm.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's the miracle part of it. I mean, I think you make a real good point there, because we understand God's very much involved in this, but they actually had to have people hold up his hands. So, God's involved. In some respects, it certainly was a miracle, but then you could say that still, when there are miracles, there's still people who have to do the work. And that's what happened. Now, go ahead, Jessica. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's good, really good. That's a good point, because they come out of captivity, then they go through this complaining, murmuring period, and now God's going to absolutely give them a demonstration that I am with you. And so the defeat of the Amalekites kind of set that off. But again, it ends up going on for a long time, and has been going on for a long time for these two particular peoples. All right, the next passage is Exodus 24:13. Exodus 24:13. Dave Baldwin, would you read that one for us? I think I'm just going to ask you to read just the one verse, but I may end up asking you to do more. So go ahead, Dave, when you're ready.
Then Moses set out with Joshua his aide, and Moses went up on the mountain with God. He said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we come back to you. Aaron and Hur are with you, and everyone involved in the dispute can go to them."
Okay, so where's Joshua mentioned? Is he farther down?
That mentioned that he went with them.
Yeah, he went with Moses. Yeah, and he's referred to in a way in verse. I thought it was verse 13, but I could be.
And Moses set out with Joshua.
Yeah, his aide or his servant, and probably aide gives us a little bit better understanding of it, because he wasn't just a servant or an aide. This was his special. I mean, that's what we begin to see, was that he had this relationship with him where he was working with Moses. And I suppose what we would conclude is that, Moses, he's learning from Moses. Go ahead, Debbie. Yeah, which is also the same. It's all translated servant generally, and there's different words that kind of spin off of it. So that people are trying to help us to understand. But he was his minister. And how does that sound, Debbie? I mean, in terms of what his relationship was with him. I mean, he wasn't his, he certainly wasn't his preacher, like, huh?
Sounds to me more like a brother.
I think it does. I mean, he was the guy who was there supporting him. Go ahead, Micah.
Is the thought that we could entertain about Joshua because, he's in this servant role, that talks about his name, how close it's
Yeah.
to Jesus in the Hebrew?
That connection has been made, yeah.
Is it kind of this preview of
It could be.
as far as him being a servant, how we today are supposed to be bondservants?
Yeah, I think any person, who's kind of a quality human being, and certainly to have the connection that he had with the people of Israel, who were also very, very important, to the fulfillment of the promise that would bring on the Christ. But I think he was this special guy. And I think you see that, you get that from an inference, really. The inference is he seems to be with him in special places. And so you draw the conclusion. I think it's a reasonable, conclusion to make. So he goes up with Joshua goes up with Moses, not all the way, but he goes up the mountain. Significant people, the elders, Aaron and other people are left down, not partially down the side of the mountain. And he goes up there with him. And of course, in the presence of God is only what? Who? Only Moses. But Joshua, he's nearby. Okay. Now, let's look in 33. Let's go ahead and read the first couple of verses of chapter 33. Clay, would you read that, please? Wait. No, this is Exodus. I'm sorry. Yeah. What did I say? No, it didn't say anything. Okay, good. Thanks, Nolan. Exodus 33, verse 1 and 2.
The Lord said to Moses, "Depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I will give it. And I will send my angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite, and the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite."
Okay, now, again, this is one of those things where I kind of shake my head because God says, I'm going to, give you an angel who's going to help you with this. And how do they react? Verse 4. Go ahead and read that, Clay.
And when the people heard this bad news, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments.
Okay. They were not happy with it. Why might they not be happy with it? Go, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, for I will not go up in your midst, because you are an obstinate people, and I might destroy you on the way.
Yeah. I mean, so that sort of doesn't give them a real good look of who they are and their self-esteem. God says, I'm not going. It's like, I'm not going to be with you people. I'm going to send my angel, which certainly was going to be very potent. But he says, I'm not going to be there with you because you are an obstinate people. So why at that point God sort of drew the line with them, that's always fascinating to me, during this account as they moved toward the land of Israel as it was. But verse 7, I'll read this now in verse 33, verse 7. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, a good distance from a camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. And it came about whenever Moses went out to the tent that all the people would arise and stand, each at the entrance of his tent, and gaze after Moses until he entered the tent. Now, I want you to kind of get that in your head. That just sounds amazing to me. He's going to the tent. Okay, everybody out. Yeah. And so what role does Joshua play in that? It's a little bit further down there, but what does he do? Is Moses always at the tent? No. Okay, so when he leaves the tent, then what happens? Joshua goes there, and I assume watches over it and protects it. I don't know. It's but I mean, it was, when God spoke to Moses, this would obviously be something to be very impressive, because that's when the cloud would come over the tent, and so they certainly knew when they were in such a sense of reverence and awe that when he's in there and the cloud's there, God is there. Go ahead, Michael.
I mean, it could have just been Joshua's own curiosity. Like, I can't help but think of the verse in James, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Like, because he had already made plans with him. And, well, we'll get into that.
Yeah, just don't move me. Don't move me down there too fast. We have enough people doing that. Yeah, that's a really good thing to think about. I mean, why do some people show up places? Because they were invited? Not always. It's because they're interested in it. Now, this sounds like a little bit more than he happens to be hanging around Moses and really is enjoying himself. I mean, it's like he has an actual position. When Moses isn't there, he stays there. So he's got a very special responsibility. But I think it has to start kind of in the way you're talking about, Micah. That is, kind of a Paul Timothy, sort of thing. They had built this relationship, and Timothy was learning about Paul, and then learning through the things that Paul wrote as well. So But nevertheless, in God's mind, there was something very significant about this guy. And he was going to use him in that way. So I think that one of the things that I find fascinating about this in chapter 32, beginning in verse 21, Robert Hood, would you read that 21 down through 24, please? Exodus 32.
Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" And Aaron said, "Do not let the anger of my Lord burn. You know the people yourself, that they are prone to evil. For they said to me, 'Make a god for us, who will go before us, for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him.' So I said to them, 'Whoever has any gold, let them tear it off.' Then they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf."
Boy, very, very impressive. I mean, we read before, they got rid of their ornaments. Do you remember that? Anyone remember what that probably is? Well, what was one of the things they hung on to when they left Egypt? Their little trinkets that were represented in idolatry. So they had those. And so when God was rebuffing them, they understood that this was not what God wanted. And so we're getting rid of these for now. But they're still there. I mean, they do show up. And that's one of those things that's hard to, I know the way I think about it. God gets you for something once, you better watch out and not let it happen again. There's something about the Israelites. They were fairly resilient in doing evil, and they sort of did these things in an inexplicable sort of way. And I know, we could draw the parallel and say, yeah, well, that tells us, just a little bit about ourselves and our sinful direction at times. But the thing is that they were really challenged. And I don't know, I mean, the circumstances, how might the circumstances had challenged them to where they could get really impatient? And I see you, Dan, I'm going to ask you to, whatever you're about ready to say or raise your hand about. Wasn't there something about related? Okay. Your brain looked like it was on fire. I didn't even know. Jeez. Yeah.
I think about habits, habits are hard to break.
Yeah, okay.
But you would think, at least, that to see what they saw, that they would have some level of conviction. I mean, and what a ridiculous story that, I threw the gold in there and out popped the cat.
Yeah.
Miracle in itself.
Yeah. I mean, they're doing all they could to make it look good. I mean, so their consciences were working even at that time, but they still did what they did.
Right.
Yeah.
I would assume he tells the story. I mean, it's speculation, but he's maybe ashamed and trying to cover that up. But,
Yeah.
I mean, surely Moses didn't believe that or buy that at all.
No. No, I mean, God eventually tells, as Moses is coming down the hill, God tells Moses, okay, this is what they're doing down there. And of course, Joshua announces it. Well, there's bad things going on down there. He talks about the music, and Moses says, well, it's not the kind of music you think. And so God knew it was going on. Moses seems to be very, very prepared. And that causes you maybe to get even more angry. It's not a surprise. So, your hand up, Larry? Or is it? Okay. All right, now. Okay.
We know that back in verse 17, Joshua warned Moses that there was going to be war. And all this time we're looking at Joshua is a very young man when all of this is happening.
Relatively speaking, he's certainly a member of the generation previous to Moses. Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, what did you say there, Janine? I didn't.
Verse 17 that you have on the list.
Yeah, go ahead and read it.
He warned him, and when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said unto Moses, there is a noise of war in the camp.
Yeah. Okay, but was it a noise of war? It wasn't a noise of war. It was, hey, we're having a party down here. So, I mean, it's important for us to understand that, Moses understood, and I believe if you go back in the text, I think God gave him the insight, into that. But, so maybe Joshua, because he's a general or a leader, and he hears it and he thinks it's music of war, he's thinking, wow, we're going to have a fight. And we're going to go out and we're going to defeat the enemy. But no, it was clear they were partying. That's what they were doing. Go ahead, Micah.
Maybe just like his heart is set on the Lord, so like I don't know, maybe his mindset is like, well, they're serving the Lord and they're serving self. Like God's maybe plan is to weed out the people, like just some of the verses is like to get the faithful into the land, the ones that are going to serve it.
Sure, and so if there would be people there that, who are ready to fight, and he hears this music, and that's what he thinks, that must be good. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, to me, when I look at Joshua, I see there's a contrast of something he does not experience that most of the people in Israel do at this time, and that is fear. The reason they built the golden calf is out of fear because they think Moses is dead and he's not coming back. They're motivated by fear. When they get to, I'm jumping a little ahead, but when the thing happens,
I'll stop you when needed. So.
with the spies, what motivates them? Fear. Every time you see when they grumble, there's fear of what's going to happen
Yeah.
and fear and uncertainty.
Right.
Joshua never has fear. He is, when, instead of having fear, he's the guy saying, no, we have God on our side, we can take this.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to go with Moses. I'm not afraid of the presence of God.
Okay.
No, we all, I'm one of two spies who says we can win.
Okay, so we'll stop right there. But he was ready to fight, and he was ready to fight for God.
Yes.
And so he was dealing with people who were oftentimes motivated by fear. And he was not fearful, I guess would be a good way of describing him. That. So, okay, great comments, guys. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's go on over to the Deuteronomy passage. And this is a change. There's a change that happens. Now, what has been determined now is that Joshua is going to take over for Moses. All right, so, and let's read Deuteronomy 1:34. Let's see. Todd, can I get you there? Read Deuteronomy 1:34 through 40.
When the Lord heard your words, he grew angry and swore an oath. None of these men in this evil generation will see the good land I swore to give your father, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. He will see it, and I will give him and his descendants the land on which he has set his foot, because he followed the Lord completely. The Lord was angry with me also because of you, and said, you will not enter it either. Joshua, son of Nun, who attends you, he will enter it. Encourage him, for he will enable Israel to inherit it. Your little children who you said would be plunder, your sons who don't know good from evil, will enter there. I will give them the land, and they will take possession of it. But you are to turn back and head toward the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea.
Okay, and that's a passage that I'd never noticed before. Okay, I'm finished with you guys. Now I want you to turn around and go back into the wilderness. I don't know how I missed that one. But anyway, Moses kind of lays it out, doesn't he? He says, we're not going to go in because we, at that particular key time, that key time was when? When the spies went in, 10 of them said, this battle is way over our head. We won't be able to handle these guys. But then who? Joshua and Caleb. All right, now, and then Moses also happens to throw in himself here. Okay, those guys aren't going. The people who were afraid, Joshua and Caleb were going, and I'm not going because I went wrong too. So the Lord was angry with me also on your account saying, not even you shall enter there. So that was when he got very angry with them. I'm not sure he's blaming it on them, but he certainly knows he was the one who did wrong. You know, he was told to act in a certain way, and he did not do that. A lot of what he did was correct. He was told that he could hit the rock, but then when he spoke, he talked about it in a way, as I said earlier, to where it sounds like he and Aaron are taking credit for this rather than giving God credit. Go ahead, quick comment there, Micah.
I can't help but think of like the type that Moses is to Christ, because like
You're on that beam. We got Joshua in there too, so
right.
so you're allowed. Go ahead.
Just because of the fact that Moses had to deal with these people who we know were obstinate, and it's like he was with them, and it's almost like he was sacrificing his life to ensure that they were going to get in.
Yeah.
Even if it like cost him not getting to see it, but God had other plans for him. He was just a servant trying to follow
Right.
God's will. So he, at the height, he died on top of a mountain. Kind of like Christ died on a hill. So I can't help
Yeah.
but see that.
Yeah. Now, don't get too carried away with that. But it is interesting. What else? Any other thoughts? I mean, I put in there that he was to look at 38 again, just for us to see how his role is going to change. Nolan, would you read that? Just read verse 38, please, of Deuteronomy 1.
Verse 38.
Uh-huh.
But your assistant Joshua, son of Nun, will encourage him, because he will lead Israel to inherit it.
Okay, so what happens here to Moses? Moses has been the what? He's been the leader. Okay. And somebody said maybe he's tired, and I know that he probably was very, very tired. Who was it that said that earlier? Oh, did you say that, Janine, that Moses was tired? Is that? Yeah, okay, well, that's right. Oh, yeah, well, and you were doing that? Good. Bob, you're going to have to hold her hands up for her over there. Okay, he was going to become the encourager. So how would that change things? Okay, this is an important thing. You know, when you're older or you're trying to help someone, how are you going to help them? So do you think that he viewed that, and I know some people who kind of do this, is, okay, I'm older, I'm going to encourage you by telling you where you're doing things wrong. Because, I got all the experience. But it means, it may mean there needs to be some correction, but if you're saying, okay, God says, you encourage him, what's Moses meant to think about that? Just why would he be able to encourage him or know that he needs to be encouraged? Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
My wife Julian said, build him up.
Yeah. That's always a pretty good choice for most of us in our relationships. Build the other person up. And he was certainly gonna need that. Go ahead, Christina.
Who better to build up Joshua to lead the people
Yeah.
than the man that just led them out of Egypt and listened to them grumble and do all the things God told them to
Yeah.
do this?
Yeah.
Who else?
Yeah, he'd be the one, but he could also be the one that goes, these people have been driving me nuts. And he actually, kind of felt that way at times. And maybe that's part of the reminder. We know what you've been through. But so like Christina says, who would be the logical choice to know maybe what I needed at a certain time? Go ahead, Dana.
On that same thought, who is Joshua going to listen to more than Moses?
Yeah, right.
That's who, somebody else comes along, he's going to say, what are you talking about?
Right.
What do you know?
I think it's a great point in that because of the closeness, going back to the point that Micah made, that he just seemed to be around. So he was learning a lot just by that. And Moses probably saw him as an individual. He's not only a great fighter, but he's going to be a good leader of these people. And I'm going to try to help him to understand that, what it's going to be like sometimes to be leading these people. So don't give up. All right, now, let's see. Seems like I had another Deuteronomy passage. Okay, go ahead, Micah, read 21 through 24. And then Larry, you can read the 25 through 28. Say it again. Where are you reading now, Micah?
I'm reading
Deuteronomy.
21 through 24.
No, you're reading chapter 3, 21, right?
3, yeah, chapter 3.
Okay, okay. You're going to really confuse us. And then 3 chapters, we'd all get tired. Go ahead, Micah. You're my man. You know that. Yeah.
I command Joshua at that time, saying, your eyes have seen all that the Lord your God has done to these 2 kings. So the Lord shall do to all the kingdoms into which you are about to cross. Do not fear them, for the Lord your God is the one fighting for you. I also pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you have begun to show your servants your greatness, your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do such works and mighty acts as yours?
It's pretty enthused and trusting in God. Go ahead, Larry.
Beginning in verse 25. Please let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that good hill country in Lebanon. But the Lord was angry with me because of you and would not listen to me. And the Lord said to me, enough from you, do not speak to me of this matter again.
Okay. So, was there a problem with that?
Oh, there was the 28.
Oh, okay, 20.
Keep on going. 27. Go up to the top of Pisgah and lift up your eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward, and look at it with your eyes, for you shall not go over this Jordan. But charge Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he shall go over at the head of this people, and he shall put them in possession of the land that you shall see, though we remain in the valley opposite of Ben-Peor.
He says, you're not going, you're going to be somewhere else. He's going to, and he is left and buried on a mountain, Moses. But, the understanding here is that you can do this. You can really do this, Joshua. And it's, I just get the sense that he was just ready to take this thing on. He just seems like he has that kind of personality. And that even though he's hanging around Moses a lot, how do you think he might be thinking about things? You come up to a situation, oh, geez, Moses just told me about this. When is this ever going to stop? Moses could just constantly be going through his list of grievances, and that wasn't going to be good for Joshua. Go ahead, Larry.
Kind of a theory that you're only as strong as weak link.
Yeah.
And Joshua was not weak, which only made Moses that much stronger.
Yeah.
Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17, it talks about iron sharpens iron.
Right.
I think they complemented each other.
I think they did.
I think Caleb complemented Moses as well.
Yeah. I think we a lot of times think of that Aaron, the brother of Moses, would have been the one most responsible for lifting up Moses, but he didn't always do that. In fact, he got in an opposition to him at one point. But Joshua he's a little bit more enthusiastic. He's younger. He's more optimistic. All those things that could make him a great leader and help him to take on the task at hand. And that's what I hope we come to understand, about who Joshua actually was. Because I find sometimes we go through these accounts and sometimes we just can't put them together. We can't sort of build a person by what we see. And so it's important to try to get some of these things and pull them together and help us to understand who he actually was. Okay, Jessica, go ahead. And this will be the last comment.
Well, we're
Yeah, right.
I don't know if that helps, but was from a significant tribe.
He certainly was. There was some royalty that came from Ephraim, so I think that's true. I see you moving back there, Robert. I'll give you 60 seconds. Go.
When I think of Joshua, the thing that I think makes him a man worth remembering is, and what makes him such a great leader, is that he's willing to stand on an island and willing to be on that island if he can support the Lord.
Right.
He doesn't care what everyone else is doing or thinking or saying about
And he proved that when he went in as a spy.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's willing to stand there and do what is right. And
Yeah.
take that heat. And that's what makes him a leader.
Yeah.
And that is what makes him worthy of this position.
Right.
Is because he wasn't going to let the grumbling and the moaning and the groaning
Right.
get to him.
Yeah. So it's important to understand he may not have been the smartest guy out there, but he had this character, and that's what mattered. That Robert's talking about, what you've been talking about. So thanks again. I'll have you. I'll probably put out the next 3 weeks. Did I do that? Did I show you the next week after? Yeah. I want you to know I really thought hard about it, but I just didn't get it down. But I'll get it out to you this time. And it's probably good that I didn't, because today I was looking at it again. I go, no, we can't do it this way. I got to switch something. So let's have a prayer, and then we'll all go home. Thanks, Father, for the challenges we get from your word, and how there are times that it brings laughter to our souls. At the same time, tears and frustration are also there when we see ourselves in the people about whom you write. And we learn from the good and from the bad, because that's what we are. We're good and bad, and it's fighting against one another, and we want to win that. And so it's great to have these examples before us who help us to know that we can do it, and we don't have to be the smartest person out there, but we do have to have to be the person of great courage. We can do that, and maybe not all the time, but we need to look for those opportunities to say, hey, I can be Joshua today, or I can be Caleb today. Help us to be able to be that, Father, and help us to be humble at the same time. Forgive us of the things that we've done wrong. Help the people that have been mentioned earlier. We know that Lear is someone that many of us hold very close to our hearts. And she's been such a good example. And I know this is a difficult time, but she's been through a lot, and I know she's going to make it through this as well. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.